Hello, my name is David Lee Jr. I'm a second year industrial engineering major at Georgia Tech. This is my final project for my ethnicity and American culture class. One of the texts that we read in this class really stuck with me. It was Good Talk by Mira Jacob, a memoir and conversations. In the book, she depicts her son asking her very tough conversations about the bigger issues in life, the massive social issues that impact life daily. And I'm curious to see how other parents and other ethnicities handle these types of questions when posed by children. So today, we're at the park in the Beltline, and we're going to walk around, and we're just going to have some conversations with people and see what we find. Could you please tell me your name?
Robert Weaver.
Yvonne Rose Garden.
My name is Lynn Giese from Belgium, Europe.
King.
Adriana.
Tiffany.
My name's Asia.
Dana Peck.
Do you have any kids?
Yeah, I have 3.
You have 3 kids? What are their ages?
12, 5, and 2.
I do. I have a son.
You have a son? How old is your son?
My son is 29.
I do.
Oh, how old are your children?
I have one child. He is 28.
I have 3.
What are their ages?
14, 16, and 19.
How many kids do you have?
2.
2? And this is your daughter, right?
Yes.
Awesome. When your son was a child, did he ask any questions about racism or any other social issues?
Yes, he did.
How did you tend to respond when he asked you questions like that?
Truthfully and directly, without a lot of embellishment, without a lot of extra. Racism is a form of fear. And explaining it in that way, how people are sometimes afraid of differences and how that can cause them to act, and also to fear prevents people from learning more. It discourages people from understanding what's going on. So truthfulness and being straightforward without traumatizing folks.
And I think that's very important because you can't sweeten it up because at the end of the day, it's a very hard thing to talk about.
Yes.
But I think it's a great way that you were able to explain it in that way so it wasn't so jarring for him. How old was he when he asked that?
Probably started asking questions about 5 or 6, when people have an awareness because someone points out to them who they are or who they think that they aren't. And then that causes people to ask questions. Why would someone treat me that way? Or, why did someone say that thing? And then being able to kind of unpack that.
That sounds very good. As a black woman, do you feel like those types of conversations need to happen earlier for black children? Or do you think it should occur around the same age for all children?
It depends on the child and it depends on the circumstances, because some people aren't affected overtly by racism in some instances, and they may not encounter a situation where they question it. But depending on your environment and circumstances, if something happens early and your child does not understand what's going on, then there are age-appropriate ways to explain people's ignorance.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So have any of your kids asked you any tough questions about racism or any other social issues?
No, not as of yet, but I'm waiting for it to come.
You're waiting for it. So how would you respond if one of your kids asked you a question like that?
I will respond that racism is something that is taught and it's something that you can't change. So if you interact racism, take it for what it is. Don't judge the person because it's something that they were raised and they were taught about.
So as a black man, do you feel like that's a conversation that we need to have much earlier than other races?
Unfortunately, yes. At the time and the ways that things are going right now, it's kind of, before you had to have a conversation when kids were teenagers, but now you have to have it when they're like in elementary school because it happens more often.
Did your parents have that conversation with you when you were a teenager, or when you were you younger?
Yes, they had it when I was, I think I was 8 when they had a conversation. When I went to a basketball game and the white people were booing me for no reason.
You were playing, or you were watching?
I was playing.
They were booing you like when you checked in?
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah.
So we had that conversation about why.
And you just, at the time, you just didn't understand.
I didn't understand it. I just didn't think they liked me for some reason, but obviously it was deeper than that.
Yeah, that's hard to hear. All right, thank you, bro.
No problem, man. Good luck.
All right, thank you. When we were younger, did we ask any tough questions about race?
I don't remember any specifically about race. I think you might have made comments, maybe not specific to you, but maybe by why things are the way they are. The only thing I can remember or is the realization that when we were talking about school systems and why the school system was different in some places of the city, and like it wasn't fair or it wasn't equitable in your sense?
Say I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I asked a question about some sort of like police brutality or some sort of like racist, racially motivated event that happened on the news. How would you respond? Like, how would you try and explain that concept to me as a child?
I guess it depends specifically on the event, but if there was a police brutality case, I would explain it facts. I'm usually pretty open and about facts, and I would just tell you that some people make decisions about others strictly on their appearance and not understanding the whole scenario. And it gets complicated with police because they have to go home to families too. So it gets especially complicated, but some people get in positions of power to purposely terrorize people of other races.
Do you feel like my siblings were more exposed to those sort of events at earlier ages than I was?
I think definitely. I think you guys have a different impression of people that are not of color. Like, I think it's like almost a sense of distrust immediately. And I think before, we didn't, growing up for me, I think we had more of a trust for police officers, and we did not second guess people that weren't of color that looked like us, because like all the media and social media has made it more, I guess, accessible to you and giving you more examples. So it was happening with us, but we didn't see it. It's like you're being bombarded this over and over again, examples of police brutality or like these Karen situations. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of been ingrained in your mind that not to be distrustful of people that don't look like you, and to distrust police.
And I've always felt like my siblings grew up faster than me, and they had a better sense of what was going on. Do you think that you had to have conversations with them about like racism and police brutality at an early age than I did?
Yes, because they were exposed to it earlier, and they see those examples firsthand. And so it's something that you have to address. You can't get away from it now. They see it on Instagram, they see it on Snapchat. I mean, the conversation, you can't get away from that conversation now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Some other social issues, and if you did, how did you approach it?
Well, the short answer is yes. I'm just trying to think of the various contexts in which the subject came up. The one that comes to mind is in our church. My wife and I taught the social justice curriculum to the Sunday school kids, and he was one of those kids that we taught 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and then later high school. So we talked about, we're Catholic. We talked in teaching that curriculum, age appropriate, right? So we were talking to 4th graders on one end of the spectrum, right, and high school kids on the other end of the spectrum. We talked about the church's social teaching, the church's teaching on social justice issue, including what we refer to in the church as the dignity of all human life. A lot of people think of that issue in very black and white terms: abortion, the death penalty. But actually the church teaches that dignity of all human life involves things like racism, right? It does damage to the dignity of human life if people are treated differently because of their ethnicity, because of the color of their skin, because of their religion, because of their social status. And so that's one context that I can think of where we addressed with our own child and other children issues about things like racism. Our son attended a large public high school in Alabama, where the student body was roughly, I would say at the time he was there, 65% white, 25-30% black, and 5 to 10% Hispanic. And so, in the context of, having a child in a public high school in Alabama, racism, unfortunately, issues around race and ethnicity are something that have to be discussed and dealt with. They come up. Why aren't there any black kids in my AP class, for example. You know, why aren't there any black kids in, you know, this class or that class? Why do all the black kids sit together at lunch and all the white kids sit together at lunch? All those kinds of things. Right. So yeah, we confronted those issues and talked to our son about those issues in those contexts and others.
Do you feel as if like those types of issues came up at an earlier age for your son than it did for you? And do you feel like social media and just the overall increasing globalization of the world contributed to these issues becoming so much more visible?
I would say that, so he graduated from high school in 2012, so that
Right.
gives you some context of the timing we're talking about. I graduated from high school in the South, public high school in the South, in 1981. So
Did you
that's,
grow up in Georgia?
no, in North Carolina. So that's, you know, gives you some difference. I would say because of my parents. My parents were both in academia and politically involved in politics. I would say that in my growing up, I was aware of racism, conversations, discussions around racism. It was not something we talked about a lot, and it is not something. I mean, look, there were three networks, right? There was no such thing as the internet.
Right.
So yeah, you either got it at home in church, or that was it. There was no Facebook, there was no social media, there was, you know, nothing. 24-hour news, 150 channels, all stripes of news coverage, real news, fake news, and otherwise. So, long answer to your question. Yes, the short answer to your question is yes. I think my son and his peers were much more aware of issues around racism in their growing up than I was in mine.
Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Did you have any experiences where your daughter or your other child asked any tough questions about racism or other social issues? And if they did or didn't, how did you answer that, and how did you respond to those questions?
They never did, and we actually grew up in North Cross when it was like there were other cultures, and I'm Mexican, so the culture is basically I have to be more focused on that. But I guess they never came to ask me that, and since I guess then they came to ask me, I never, I guess, took the even chance to maybe teach them.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it says so.
Yeah, I don't really have any memories of that either, to be honest. And like, yeah, I don't know. It's pretty interesting. So I wish we had more to say, but yeah, I don't really recall honestly having that conversation. But yeah, I can say like, I don't know. I feel like we grew up in a pretty diverse area. Yeah, we grew up in a pretty diverse area, like just here in Georgia and stuff, and like where we were, which was like in like Norcross and like Gwinnett County and stuff like that. So there was like a lot of different like, you know, like Asians, Eastern Europeans, and like Hispanics and stuff like that. So I think that made it kind of, I don't know, not so crazy. Because like right now I'm living in California, and like I'm surrounded with a lot of Mexicans, and like for me, I feel comfortable in that. You know, I feel comfortable because I didn't have so much of that here. But like my Mexican friends there are like, some of the things they say kind of catch me by surprise. I'm like, I grew up with some more diversity here, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of my experience with it now at this age. I kind of feel like I had a little bit more exposure here in Georgia and where we were at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Thank
Nice to meet you. Do you have any kids?
No, I don't have any kids.
If a kid was to ask you, or if you had like a younger cousin or a younger nephew or niece, and they wanted to ask you to explain what is racism, how would you explain that?
Well, I'm actually thinking of writing a book about it, and I'm actually having it definitely already in my head how to structure the book. It's actually, I traveled all over the world, and I think everyone's normal is a different normal. So what you find normal in your daily life in America is not absolutely normal in Belgium, Europe, or normal in India in a little village. So I think the normal for everyone is different, and therefore we don't understand each other because we think our norms and values are everyone's norms and values, and that's where we always collide. As especially in Europe, you find that with African people, their norms and values are so different. What they find in their home country, their norms are so different that, you know, we expect them to get into our norms. So that's where the discussion really starts. It's the not understanding each other's norm.
Right.
That's what I think what racism is all about, and how we can prevent it is just to explain more and more to our younger people, like, look, that's what you find normal, but their normal is different. So
Right.
if you explain that to young people, I think they will be open to it and understand way better the difference between cultures, and it's culture-wise, it's religion-wise, it's all kind of levels where you find these norms that are changing.
And that's really well said. And for the book you're writing, are you focusing on specifically racism in Europe, or are you around the world?
Well, as a white, blonde female, a woman traveling the world,
Right.
I've come across with lots of racism myself, which is so weird, because racism is thought like, you know, Black Lives Matter, like it's only happening to black people. I got spat on in India, I got spat on in China, you know, and the Muslims in Malaysia just pushed me out and said, you take the bus back to wherever you came from, we don't want you in our little town. So I think, you know, racism exists in every culture, every color, every, you know, standard between, you know, rich and poor people. I think it exists everywhere.
That's interesting. Thank you very much. It was nice meeting you.
You're welcome. Nice meeting
To meet you. Do you have any kids?
I do not have kids. I'm a kid.
Say like further down the line, you have to explain racism to your child, or if you had to explain racism to like a younger sibling or a niece or a nephew, how would you go about that?
I would basically just, to the little people, explain racism as someone treating you differently because of your skin color or your culture, the way you look, and not treating you like everybody else, you know?
At what age do you feel like your parents had to have that discussion with you, or did you have like some event that triggered them having to talk to you?
So I don't really feel like it was a particular discussion, but I did grow up mixed. So for me, it was kind of like, I grew up around a lot of Filipino people. I'm half Filipino, half Haitian. And people would always tell me like, oh, you're not Asian. Oh, you're not black. So then as a little kid, you know, it would confuse me about my own identity. You know what I mean? And then even just growing up around Filipino, like everybody's hair was straight, everybody's skin was like lighter, and it just made me feel weird about myself, you know? But then, you know, getting older, it does become a topic a lot, especially like in school and with the social climate that we're in.
Do you feel like your parents had to, or they were exposed to things like that at an older age than you? Do you feel like because of social media and the internet and just increasing globalization, are those topics like more readily available for us nowadays?
Oh yeah, definitely. I feel like, you know, back then they did experience more racism, but I feel like racism's always going to be around, but because of social media and globalization and everything, I feel like a lot more of the younger generation is open to having the conversation and talking about those things and trying to like kill that issue.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I can honestly say that I really thoroughly enjoyed every single conversation that I had making this project. It was really interesting just being out in Atlanta, asking different people their perspective on such a pointed question, because honestly it is a tough question to ask. It's even tougher question to answer. But I think every single person that I interviewed gave a unique perspective on a question that a lot of people have to worry, or really everyone should have to worry about at some point in their life. Because ultimately, if we're not teaching kids about racism when they ask about it, and if we're shunning it to the side and we're dismissing it as something that maybe we'll talk about later, we're literally robbing them of the ability to effectively communicate and treat others. And one thing that I really found interesting as I continued this was that I really wanted to make it feel as if everyone had a chance to tell their own narrative about racism and about teaching kids about racism. And while there were some things that maybe I might have not necessarily agreed with, whether it was their approach or something like that, I felt like I really want to display Atlanta and maybe America as a whole and their different takes on racism and their different approaches to teaching racism to children. And ultimately, I wanted to make it feel like one conversation. I wanted it to feel like a continuous flow, but also realizing that every response is going to be different because every individual is different and everyone's experience with racism is different. Ultimately, I hope that my project helps to create a widespread canvas of the different experiences of racism in our world, and I hope that it helps people realize that we have to continue this conversation if we ever want to truly make progress in the future. Thank you.